Hello, and welcome to another episode of the LEI'D Back Life podcast, where we really want to help people own a business they can be proud of and live a life that's even better. How can you love entrepreneurship and intentionally design the life that you want? Last week, we had Jay Ruane on to talk to us about being intentional about so much of what you're creating and how Jay has done that through his journey. This week, I've got Victor Medina on, who, and I quote, sent me the bio, "You make one up." So thankfully, I know Victor well enough that I'm going to do this. So by day, Victor is an estate planning and a financial advisor in New Jersey. But by night, Victor Medina is the person that I truly try and, what's the book? The Napoleon Hill, right? When he creates his random council of fake dead people, you thankfully are not dead, but my fake council of people in my brain, Victor Medina sits at that council table. And so when I'm stuck on something, I often ask myself, what would Victor Medina do? Because I love the mindset that you have on so many of these things. So thank you for being with me today.
Flattered. I'm flattered and I'm grateful I don't have to be dead to sit at the table. So
Correct.
I'm happy for both of those pieces and the way I play those roles.
So we talked a little bit beforehand, and Victor brought up this great point among many other great points he's brought up. But in essence, so many games are played on somebody else's scoreboard. So can you kind of go deeper into that, and then let's talk about how we flip that script?
Absolutely. Let's start there. I think one of the things that should be mentioned just in part of the bio is one of the side hustles or gigs that I do is I coach other lawyers and helping them practices. And so I do that sometimes on a one-on-one basis and sometimes in a group basis. The reason why I'm just mentioning that is that when I have conversations with them, when they measure what success looks like, or when they're measuring how they're doing in life, in the beginning, the conversations are always focused on living a life of achievement. And what I mean by that is that they're playing the game according to somebody else's scoreboard. Now, there's some scoreboards that we will commonly understand, like how much money are they making? That's a really common scoreboard. People will share that. Sometimes their scoreboard is by the kinds of cases that they take. Who do they appear in front of? What is the nature of their business? Rarely do I find the person in the beginning of these conversations that's living a life of greatness. And greatness is when you play the game according to your own rules, when you set the scoreboard up from the beginning. And the reason why that is so important is that it leads to conclusions on two other ends of the spectrum. Sometimes it leads people to lead a life that looks smaller by comparison. So it's a form of release. They don't have to make $1 million a year in revenue, break the magic 7 figures kind of thing on an annual basis. They can live a life that's smaller because the life that they're designing is best served by a practice that looks different and smaller than what someone else's scoreboard is. But the same thing happens on the other end too, Jordan, which is that they realize that the fishbowl that they've been swimming in is way too small for what they want to achieve. And really, it was because the scoreboard was designed by somebody that they believed had some influence on them maybe 20 years ago. The one lawyer that they met that was a senior partner, they're like, oh, that's the measure. The measure is to make partnership by 7 years and do these types of things. When really what they're built for or what they could achieve on their own is far grander than that. And it's a release in the other direction. So I really like to take the step of figuring out what a great life is for someone first, and then look at whatever is the business, that practice, the things that they need to do that makes that possible. And I think people become much happier when they're living a life of their own design than the one that is set up by barriers and all of these old formats of things that someone else has set up before them.
Okay, so the way that you mentioned this makes me think of my child so much, because my child will create all these games, and then the minute I'm better at them, he will change the rules in the middle to figure it out. I have to assume, I know my child is abnormal, usually for the better part, but I have to assume that part is more common. So where do we start to see this inability to create our own game, change our own rules? How does that get beaten into us?
It's a really insightful follow-up question, because it leads to a discussion that I've been having more and more, like with friends, or with people that can have conversations like you at this level, or with things like that. I believe my current theory is that we're very uncomfortable renegotiating commitments that we've had. And so what ends up happening is like if we've made a commitment to be a certain person, if we've made a commitment to show up a particular way, we have this abnormal grip on that is not open to reevaluation, to renegotiation, to another discussion. Like the way your son resets the game rules based on what's going on there. I love that. That is great. Sort of an example for what's going on because it's true. Why do we need to keep playing the same game? Look, there are very common parallels in this that we know about, like in tropes, where you're no longer running the rat race, or you're running the corporate thing off of it, and you're like, I veer off. Why? Because you then agree a renegotiation, the commitment that said, I had to find my path by doing these particular things. When you're willing to do that, you explore all kinds of things. So it's the difference in a very Buddhist way between a commitment towards leading a great life and an attachment that a great life is only led one particular way. So when you're
Mm.
committed, there are lots of options to get out there. When you're attached, there's only one way through. And many people lead that sort of very attachment mentality towards whatever has been defined without the willingness to say, I'm going to let that go. I'm still committed to leading a great life. I just am not attached to how that's defined right now or what the path is going to be to get there.
It's it's so interesting you answered that way. Literally yesterday I was at Topgolf with a bunch of referral sources and we were talking about in essence like what is the top level of modern Western capitalism? And I was like, it's either Buddhism or Stoicism. Like you have to pick or a combination of both. Like the
Sure.
ultimate top of being a true capitalist is bringing Buddhism or Stoicism into your everyday life.
It's sort of when you hit peak corporate, ladder ascension is now you're having these discussions with these beliefs and this thinking. It's so we all can draw from different things. You're a lifelong learner. I'm the same way. I listened to a podcast episode just yesterday, also by Scott Galloway, who is this really kind of acerbic, business professor from
I
NYU and also done other things. But he
that
talked.
was the listen for any of you who don't know Scott Galloway, you have to go read the four. But that was you had the best, most dead on adjective right there.
So he was talking about his shift in his philosophy when he was running a business before versus the way that he consults with the business now. And it's this shift that we were just talking about. Because before it was how do I increase the value for my own purposes? That's a very traditional capitalist approach. It says I have you as leverage for my furtherance. The switch he has now is how do I maximize your ability to succeed in terms of his team and who he manages? And I went through
Hmm.
that. I went through that avenue. And so once that's been released, when it's not so dead center hooked on to one definition off of it, but now we've got I'm gonna take life the way it comes at me kind of thing, not like I have some belief that I know how it's going to happen. A lot of things get opened up. A lot of happiness is involved because this is the purpose of this particular podcast and discussion is lead a great life, really kind of have that be at the center of what you're doing rather than the definition of the practice. That becomes possible. You're at peace. You get to experience other things. You get to get happy by watching other people be happy as well. You get to borrow that from them because that's a part of your focus. So I think we're very aligned on that idea, that says that shift in philosophy, the Buddhist Stoicism shift in philosophy, ends up being a very powerful and a transcendent kind of approach when you finally get to a point.
But is that transcendence is transcending us from somebody else's scorecard, removing that attachment into the ability to play our own game?
I think that's fair. I think it's a fair way of saying it because it provides the mechanism for the release. Look, we still have to make payroll, cut checks that don't bounce. There are still some practicalities of life that have to get met. You don't get to go live in a yurt someplace and just live off the grid, unless you've designed your great life to do that. But the idea is we
Yeah.
still have realities of that come in there. But specifically, how you measure your progress towards your goal, the release of it being against somebody else's scoreboard. And I challenge people who are listening to this to examine if they're listing what their goals look like, how many of those goals were set by one of two people, either somebody other than them. In other words, they've got a revenue goal, if they have a financial freedom goal, if there's something that's in there, if they have a size of a firm goal, the marker for that, is that yours or is that set from somebody else? Is that something for somebody that you met? Is that somebody that you admired and you looked up to when you started your practice? And you're like, because I remember, for example, one of my games of achievement was a BMW. And the reason why it was a BMW was when I was a law clerk for a federal judge, is one of the gigs that I had. There was a really important civil rights trial at the federal level. So it was a Section 1983 case. And the lawyer that represented the police union for this constantly threw his BMW keys on the table. Not in a showy matter. He just showed up and they were on counsel's table, was in there, and I'd be walking around as the clerk, handing things out, talking with people, asking what they needed. But for me, that became the marker and the measure that was indelibly printed on me when I was 24, right? And that existed for 15 or 20 years. And I only realized afterwards, get the BMW, was because of that lawyer 20 years ago. That's somebody else's scorecard. So how many of the markers are set by somebody else? And really examine that. And the second one,
hold on. Before you transition to number two,
yeah,
are you saying the marker is any answer for how much I want to make, or that the specific answer is somebody else's marker, or both?
it could be both. I'm not really sure that I understand the distinction in the question, but people will line up what their goals are. And those goals, whether they're 10-year goals out that they're still reaching for, or they're things that they want to accomplish in the next year. But many times the goals that they are marking as a measure of success, which they hope will lead to happiness, are measures that were set by someone else. In other words, the reason why they were given validation is external, not internal. They were given some measure of being important because of somebody outside of yourself.
But okay, so let me try this again. Is your concern like, I want to have $1 million firm is somebody else's marker, or is your concern, I want to have a revenue marker is somebody else's marker?
No, no, no. That the $1 million is the measure that matters. That the dollar
Okay,
amount specifically is really set by somebody else. If you have a revenue goal and you're like, well, I have a revenue goal, and then the rest of that sentence is because it helps me lead this definition of a great life. And that great life is one that you've created all by yourself. They're not informed by anything else, meaning it wasn't because you're like, let's get around the couch for a second. You're outpacing what your father did, and that's the measure off of, like, therapy first. Like that's not the measure. The measure is have enough money to go to therapy. Let's start there. But if those measures are things that you've internally set and your revenue goes in service of that, I think you hit like gold star. You get the gold star for it, right?
okay.
But if you're looking at it as like, I want to have a firm with 4 offices. Why? Well, because I think it's going to be really great. It's a mark of success. Why? And if we ultimately get to the point in time, is because my law school rival, who outpaced me 10 years ago, had 4 offices that were spread across the state, or somebody that I met at a bar conference that spoke on stage and flew in on his private jet had the 4 offices. That's the one I want you to release. That's the one we want to question.
Gotcha. Okay.
The second category is goals that were made by a younger version of you. So I remember this. I drink the champagne that I offer other people, which is that I get involved and I have a coach. So I remember when I was working with my coach, I shared with him what was my exercise for what a great life looked like. And I handed it over. This was very early in our sort of formal professional relationship, because it was a guy I knew as a coach and he would do that informally. Now I'm paying him a lot of money to go and do these things, right? And so I hand over my list, and it's the list of goals, Jordan. And he takes a look at it, and then he kind of hands it back, and he's like, okay. I go, yeah, this is now, let's say 2018, 2019 or so. He said, okay, that's great. He says, I want you to do something now. I said, what? He goes, I want you to write your goals, because these goals were made by the 2008 version of Victor. And you've been carrying them along for 10 years, but these really aren't the goals of the person that you currently are and what you're capable of. The same concept of an attachment disorder to whatever I had set up before, which is really why I'm highlighting this as the second category. This
Right.
attachment of goals that were set by somebody who is fundamentally different. So this younger version of you does not have the life experience that you've accumulated, the wins that you have gotten under your belt, the skill set that you have added, the newfound direction of whatever it is. It's not that person's goals. And one of the things I do to challenge this notion is this exercise of sort of goal setting in general. You know, my coaching program, the umbrella under which I work, has a form that they use for this. And so I reuse that form. I complete this about once a month. And it's not, and the way to do it isn't to write the stuff over and over again without thinking about it. The real challenge is to contemplate, like everything's got to earn its spot off of it because you're kind of breaking it down in 10 years, 3 years, and you're kind of white stoning yourself away across the river with these little, stepping stones across. But the goal of rewriting it, the goal of revisiting it, is to challenge whether or not that still gets to be a goal. And it's not because you didn't achieve it. And it's not because it wouldn't have been important. It's because it needs to earn its spot for your time and attention. And this ultimately gets to the core of like these my beliefs of what we guard and what we accumulate, which is the spending of our time. I can make anybody all of the money that they want. I can remake the money again, but I can't add time into the bank. I can't add
Right.
more days, more years. I can't have any of those things, your experiences with your kids when they were 6 and now they're 7. Can't get you 6 anymore. I can't get you 4 anymore. So I really want you to be stingy, contemplative, really discriminating with the spending of your time. And so in rewriting these goals, in revisiting the goals, what you're really saying is that I have a bank account of time and I'm deciding to spend it for the next month, the next 90 days. And I want to make sure that that dollar that I'm spending, that dollar of time that I'm spending is well spent. It's still earn it because I know I can't ever get it back. I can be frivolous with actual money. I go make that again. I can't be frivolous with the spending of my time. And that's really the purpose for releasing people away from attachments to these old goals is because the time can't get back if you spend it someplace else.
Well, and that's like, it's funny the way you frame that because I always talk about like automation and systemization as the compound interest of time. Like
Yeah,
here we are having this run more, here we are having this run as efficiently as possible. And so to truly talk about, spending your time as money towards in service of these goals, I think is a very good way to
love
look at
that.
it.
I love it, Jordan, because you're actually doing the thing I said it wasn't possible, which is manufacturing time into the bank. Like by going in through the automations, like you thought you spent that stuff already. I just gave it back to you. I redeposited in the account, because you had already pre-spent the amount of time that it was going to take for you to do these things. And by going through automation and technology, I actually redeposited some of that time back into your bank. Now go spend it well.
Thank you, I think.
Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
cool.
Yeah.
But so what's the hang up that keeps us in this trap? Is it like I like poker analogies, right? So I always think of like the pot committed. You're
Yeah.
sitting there with a good hand in
Money's
Texas
already in.
Hold'em. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then like the flop sucks for you, but you have so many chips in.
You got to keep going. You're pot committed.
But how do we get over that? Because it's amazing to me the people that look up 20 years later and are still fucking miserable because they were
Yeah.
pot committed every day and never changed it. Like, how do we have the wake up call?
And you're right on with the analogy because the longer that somebody spends in that time, it's been in time in that area, the harder it is to let it go. You're more and more invested in that definition. I'm going to be making up the answer as
Sure.
I start to speak because I don't know that I know it for sure. But my suspicion is that there's something first unique or special about being a lawyer that suggests that failure means more in this industry than it means something else. So I don't mean failure in terms of like the abdication of your duties or whatever else,
Right.
but the lack of being that prototypically successful, the bringing on the case, the growing, the having the path, the having the money many times. And, being a lawyer means something in terms of what your salary is, status in the community, like what's wrapped into the identity. That concept, I think, in lawyers suggests that failure is a worse fate than it is in other industries. Because what do you compare it with? Well, you compare it with entrepreneurs that are constantly failing and they fail fast. And then they restart. They talk to these serial entrepreneurs and they're not always successful in all of them. And it doesn't seem to matter to them. Or you'll have people that'll go in and they're very comfortable shifting from job to job. Find me the lawyer that changes practice areas once they get settled in there. Doesn't happen. Once people get in and they niche on something, it's very rare. They were like, yeah, I was a matrimonial attorney for 10 years, loved it. Then I decided I wanted to go into personal injury or estate planning, and I did that for 10 years. And now I'm doing land use, appeals. Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen often. It happens every once in a while. But I think there's something that is in that industry that says failure is means more, and therefore you find a bolus of people in there that are unwilling to fail. That's one suspicion that I have. The other suspicion that I have in terms of
Wait, hold on. Before you jump to that one,
yeah.
first, I want to highlight how you started this question with like, I don't know the answer, I'm going to try. So that the most honest thing ever on the internet. Along the lines of that first one, though, I feel like the billable hour plays into that because like you are truly trading time for money. And so you have this concept of like the more that I invest my time, the more I can make my hourly rate. And so like if I ever change gears, I'm throwing away all this time that got me to a higher rate. Like we have a weird
Oh,
relationship with time and
that
money, I
for
think.
sure. Yeah, the on a granular level, the idea
Yeah.
that we have a hard time value billing or moving to an alternative fee structure other than the hourly billable hour, I think definitely plays into it. It's a structural constraint. Off of that, I got into someone was wrong in the internet, so I argued with them. I got into this debate on a Facebook group of financial advisors that were complaining about a compliance attorney that was billing by the hour for like it was a half an hour of the paralegal's time to call and schedule the meeting with the lawyer, and they were complaining, and it was on the bill. And so I took the moment not to argue with them, but to like pontificate to this group of financial advisors that don't work with lawyers. I said, I worked with lawyers for a long time and I am one, so let me tell you what we've been taught. And that really is that the only thing that we have to do is to trade our time, and any time that we spend on one matter means the unavailability of that time for another client. And so they try to capture all of this. So I would tend to agree with you, Jordan, that the billable hour, or even the early education that we got, that all that a lawyer has to trade is his time. And I forgot who exactly had that quote, but that idea that that time spent is that thing that is worth trading, can definitely factor into it. I think you're onto something with it.
And then you had a second one that I jumped in front of you on.
So the other suspicion that I have in terms of why we still have these hangups in there is to the idea of the failure being a bigger option. I'm sorry, a bigger risk or a higher risk off of it. Um, there is a lot of there is a lot, I think, in a lawyer wrapped into their identity of what the public's perception of what a lawyer is. And so what I mean by that is that there are a set of walls that are built around people that they feel that they can't break through. And so what ends up happening is that they can't reformat a life that would somehow violate the expectations of people that matter to them. Because in other words, if we had somebody that didn't matter, and then we could release that. But their family, their parents, their siblings, their neighbors, their all of that stuff is very powerful. And I remember there's like some one of the off like take home ideas of landmark forum education, which is kind of est, which is still Buddhism or whatever else, is that people don't really think about you as much as you think they do. They don't care about you, like your problems, what you're making. They really don't. But we do build it into something pretty substantial. And so when those walls are thick and they seem like they are in and on top of you, and there's not a lot of room to move inside of it, it's almost reasonable that we don't see a lot of people breaking outside of it. We don't see a lot of people willing to fail, to go and try something different, to make a shift that wouldn't conform with somebody else's expectations. That, I think, has as much to do with it as some of the other stuff that we've been talking about.
Well, and my favorite example of what you just talked about There was that meteorologist who wore the exact same outfit every day for an entire year for millions of people watching the news, and not a single person had any idea for an entire year on TV every day or 5 days a week, a whole year, same thing. No one had a freaking clue. And
I had
it's,
no idea about that. That's hilarious.
yeah, it's we'll have to pull the information, drop some on the video. But yeah,
Well, let me
I'm with you.
that I'm the guest and you're the
Yeah.
host, or it's your show, but you've broken from the mold, right? So you would like, here's an example of this. No one would expect their lawyer to routinely wear Hawaiian shirts as part of the brand of who they are, right? So you had to break through that sort of expectation. Do you have an idea about why you were comfortable breaking with the expectations of what a lawyer would traditionally be when so many other people aren't?
Because I was miserable and I didn't want to continue to be miserable. And I wish I remember what comedian. There's a comedian who talks about like when you're wearing a tie, it's like a really weak person's trying to strangle you. And if you put a backpack on, it's like a child jumped on your back and tried to choke you, like this whole thing. And I was just like, why? What the fuck is the point of any of this?
Yeah.
And so and the Hawaiian shirt thing was not an overnight. That was we I built towards that, but knowing I wanted to be like kind and approachable. So
Yeah.
we'd go to these networking events and I'd be there in like a blue polo with my law firm, name tag and shorts. And so many more people would come up to me because everybody else was wearing a suit. And so
Yeah.
it just like and then that became more cases, that became more referrals, that became the opportunity to speak because I stood out from being comfortable, which
Yeah.
also I think I showed up better because I was comfortable in the
It was
moment.
natural. It
And
came all the way
then
through. Yeah. It,
yeah,
it it was effervescent from you, as you showed up. I love that. I really do love that. It for me says a couple of things. One, and I would totally agree that more people will change out of a sense of pain than out of a sense of desire. So, being miserable for me rings true in terms of the impetus of that change. And the other thing is, if I think through how and where I broke molds, um, the or origins of that are really not charitable. And then I'll get to the better part where I'm more
yeah,
enlightened. I'm a
I'm,
better
I'm
human being.
intrigued.
So the origins of it that aren't charitable is I would go and I would meet with other lawyers and I didn't like them. I don't like them. To this day, that stereotypical model, I don't like being around those people. So I remember the first time that I recognized that, it was kind of early in my business ownership career, like my law firm ownership. I wanted to go to a conference for just Mac or Apple using attorneys. And so I started the one because it didn't exist. And I figure if I organize it, I'll just get to go to this conference. And what I experienced when I showed up with these people is like these were finally the people that I liked being around. This is back 2008 or so. And back then, it wasn't as common for Macs to be used in law practice because we didn't have software as a service. We weren't didn't have things that were platform agnostic. So I would show up and we had people that were entrepreneur by nature, a little bit risk taking, a little more casual, had to be collaborative and collegial
Uh,
because it was a
I'm a
smaller.
Mac and I'm a PC. Like you have the
Yeah,
whole
exactly. These are the people in hoodies as opposed to the people in suits. And I liked that. I could have a drink with anybody at the conference. The conference grew into a gathering of friends on an annual basis, and these became friends. And you juxtapose that with the bar association lunches that I would go through for CE, and I'm like, I still don't like those people. So for me, the change was really driven because I did not like the community. I didn't like being around what's in there. And I told you that's the part that's not charitable. What I found that's been more charitable is that I have come to learn that, as you've suggested, these people are just as frustrated as I am. I don't think they're trying to be this way. I think they would like to be otherwise. And I've had the good fortune of coaching people who started that way, who had an inkling of a desire to be otherwise, gets to the other side. And so now I can enter into that with a little bit more hope, a little bit more grace, a little bit more willingness to withstand being around them for a while. By the way, it's a small percentage that actually go through the process to get better, but I have hope for everyone that comes in, and that part of it means that I wasn't alone when I started, and I would have loved to have somebody that could have helped me back in that day. I kind of want to be that person now, but that what it was for me was also a sense of pain. It was like I'm miserable being around these people. I wasn't personally miserable being that person because I don't think I ever was, but I was miserable being around those people and I didn't want to.
so similar story. different reason. So CleoCon last year, right?
Okay.
And I want to be clear. I hate a bunch of lawyers mostly when they're egotistical jerks. So that is not the case in this one. But it was just
Okay.
so funny. There's 2,500 lawyers in last year in where was it last year in Nashville in this
Okay.
giant room, the whole thing. And so like I'm on the phone with somebody. I'm like, okay, what table you're at? Oh, we're in the one in the back over by the door. And I'm like, there's 1,000 doors, the whole thing. I'm like, do you see the one person in a Hawaiian shirt? They're like, oh yeah, yeah, turn to your left. Like everybody could find everybody everybody could find me because of the shirt versus everybody
Sure.
else is in navy and black. It was just so funny, like the not from a aggravation standpoint, but just truly from a standing out standpoint. All right, so I wanna flip for a second. Is
Sure.
there anything we need to cover? I want to transition into how we start writing our own scoreboard, creating our own scoreboard. But anything else you want to cover
Exactly where I
before we
want to
make
go
that?
with it. Yeah, no, got nothing else to add there. I'm right with you. Let's go talk about how to fix the problems.
Okay, so before that, coming out this Friday, my newsletter this week is actually about the tooth of problem solving. I'm going to walk you through me having dental issues and how that led me to realize how you solve every problem. Bringing in an expert, finding the right tools, creating the habits, and it has a great outcome. My gums don't bleed randomly. So,
I love it.
you
And by
know,
the way, the video of you doing this, as you're given the pitch, you've got pearly whites. They look great. So we know that's actually worth listening to
there's
because that's a smile that everybody wants.
there's only one fake one, and I don't know if you could tell which one it is. So I have a Jeanette. So my mom had a baby tooth until
Uh-huh.
she was in her 40s. I had a baby tooth until I was in my 30s. Benji has a cleft palate that healed in utero, which is probably the same tooth issue the whole way through.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
sure. Wow.
anyway, all right. So, but with that, I hope you guys will check out that newsletter on Friday. That being
Oh, great.
said, how do we start creating our own life scoreboard?
Yeah.
What's the beginning of this?
Yeah. So the path that I went on that I would recommend for other people because it was this one sounds like extra because it's not a pat answer, but we will get to things that are really practical. We can't fix a problem that we don't notice exists. And so the first thing that I did in terms of going down this path, Jordan, is I started to notice the scripts that were playing themselves out in my life that I didn't know, I didn't realize were so controlling. So let's take a step back. I think that we have stories, and I believe that these stories that we tell ourselves all serve. And what I mean by that is that we can never get to a point where we can call the stories false, or else like it's not sustainable because the stories have served to get us here. I'm gonna get practical in a second
Mm,
with it so that we can see where the rubber meets the road. But I had to start to document these stories before I could create a more empowering story off of it. So here's the practical example of it. I believed for about 10 to 12 years of my law firm ownership the particular story that says that the hustle was necessary as an ingredient to success. Now, it's a story that I've told myself and that I believed. And I want to make it clear that story to me is 100% true. I can't go and actually say to myself that the hustle's unnecessary because what I had was 10 to 12 years of successful experience living by that story. So you're not going to get very far in validating it. But I did have to figure out what was it about my strong commitment to working and being a workaholic that was so that had such a hold on me, right? And so where was that existing? So I had to kind of figure out what that story was. Now, this one sounds hippy dippy, but listen, anybody listening this far is going to know I'm going to go in that direction anyway. So we already lost the people we're going to lose. I started journaling to try to figure out what those stories were. I tried to figure out stories that I had associated with finance. Like I started journaling, what are my financial stories about what money means? What are my stories about what work means, what leadership means? I had to kind of notice, I had to stop and notice what was going on because I was just living by them and they were playing in the background. Until I could diagnose what that story was, I could not find a better or more empowering story. So let's take the next step. So I figured out, for example,
Wait,
just go ahead.
before
Yeah.
you hold on. So I want to remove the hippy dippy thing.
Okay.
Modern psychology has this complete and utter interest in journaling because
Yeah.
by doing that, you actually activate your prefrontal cortex in a
Yes.
chronological order to play through the thing. And so, like,
Yeah.
there are so many real therapies that are built upon the process of journaling because in our heads, we think in stream of consciousness, an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. So,
Yeah. We have to bring order from those thoughts and translate them from the brain into language as we go through the journaling experiences. By the way, the same
yeah.
way talk therapy ends up being as illustrative as it is in terms of diagnosing and seeing things is because you're doing the same thing. You're bringing order to chaos and thoughts through language. And that's a higher brain function stuff. So we're on the same page. So great. Not hippy dippy, practical, grounded, traditional. Okay. Off of it. So the journaling part. So I noticed a story, and it was all about overworking and working hard, and it was at sacrifice to spending time with my wife and my family, right? Not in a tragic sense like I lost them because I never did. I have a very strong relationship. I had a strong relationship with my kids. I would break myself to be at every soccer game, at every event, and none of them would tell you that I was an absent father. But it wasn't what I thought I was capable of, one, or
Mm.
two, what I wanted to actually produce. So I wanted something different, and I thought I could do something different. So I had to try to figure out how to be someone different through that. So I sort of figured that part out in terms of the story. So if I could not invalidate the story that the hustle was necessary, I needed to have a more empowering story. Now, here's the part that sounds like it's fake and therefore not effective, but I have to represent it's 100% effective. It doesn't matter what the story is. In other words, there is no particular strength in one story over another. Find the story that works because the story only matters to you and go with that one. And the reason why I took the kind of time to explain this is that I auditioned multiple stories as a more empowering story than the hustle is necessary. And I finally settled on one, and it was really through exploration, which was this. My biggest fear, nightmare, was that I would conscribe my children to my same life. Look, I was willing to
Ooh.
sacrifice all of my work and time and health and happiness or whatever else to provide for them. I'm not asking a lot from the world. I don't need to be happy. I don't need to do these things. I'm willing to sacrifice those things. It's my responsibility to sacrifice those things to provide for my family and to provide the life for my children. That's my job. But then, if you tell me that I then signed my children up to have the same life, I would have failed. And so I would have said, then my more empowering story is I need to become a beacon of light that attracts my children to a better life because they're taking their modeling and the observation. They'll either learn that they don't want to do it, or they want to, in which case that doesn't is not really instructive about what to do, or they can find in me something that they want to model and find. And so what I need to do is shift my who I am and how I show up to some lighthouse, a beacon that pulls them in a direction that illuminates a path for them. And that became for me a more empowering story that said, if that is a bigger goal, then I have to stop living like the hustle is necessary because the other thing is more important. It's not that the hustle necessary isn't true, right? I didn't invalidate it. It was what served off of
Right.
it. I have a better, more empowering story. And I had to audition a couple of them before I settled on that one.
Well, and I think it's interesting. So I talk about hitch problems, right? Like the Will Smith movie where he can
Okay.
find love for everybody else and talk them through it except for himself. Like you're
Right.
too close to it. And so it's interesting because that like it seems like I mean, you do attorney coaching, you do all like this stuff, like it taking yourself out of it as if I really want to pass this down is your way of like taking that one step back.
Yeah, absolutely true, Jordan. I would tell you that it is a blind spot that continues. And one I have to remind myself of. I have a rope team in our language. These are the people that help you ascend the mountain. And so it's not really coaches. These are kind of uh, people that are, equals on the same level, horizontal level of you, all their, coaching participants. So I have a rope team. Interestingly enough, the rope team is made up of people like me who have shifted to non-traditional work. So one's a full-time coach. The other presents programs for people. Doing the financial advising. So it works because we're not talking about law firm ownership problems in the same way. But one of the things that we talked about in there, and I asked them to hold me accountable for, is I am a much better coach to other people than I am to myself, and I am blind applying the same coaching principles to my problems. And so I said to them, sort of in joke, just in passing, I said, look, you may diminish your view of my coaching abilities and prowess if you have to remind me of the same thing that I already know because I don't remember to tell myself of it, or you might already think low of me and we can just go off with it. But the idea is I need some help holding a mirror up every once in a while and going, great. If you had to put your arm around yourself as a big brother and say, hey, listen, I got your back. Can I just help you with a couple of things here off of it? What would you say? And I don't have a great cadence for doing that internally. I can't do it on my own. And I don't think that that's what I call it a character flaw. I don't really think that it is something that is unexpected or unreasonable. I think we
Right.
all have a blind spot. I think we all live in that bubble. It's very difficult for us to pick our head up and notice what's going around unless we have some mechanism for doing it that forces it to happen. We won't do it naturally. And so whether that's going in through this journaling exercise and then trying and noticing what happens, or through an accountability set of partners that says, help me on this path. I don't think anybody arrives there by themselves and does it alone off of it, or some cadence on which you're constantly evaluating your great life and discovering what's important and evaluating what's in there. We need structure to support us from falling backwards. And that's what that's the other secret that I would put in is we got to find the tool that's working and then build the scaffolding underneath to help support us on that path.
But as a credit to you, I don't think that's terribly unique. Like there comes a certain point in life where you have to be reminded a lot more than you have to be taught something new.
Oh, good. True. Yeah, I agree
And
with that.
that's what it
Absolutely.
is.
Great point. And I love the way that you said it. I'm gonna steal it.
Go for it. Which is like, dude, I've read 130 something books so far this year, right? And people are like, well, have you implemented stuff from them? I was like, no, there is not a situation of I implemented 130 books in my head
Right.
in my life. A lot of them are similar. So it's more, it's figuring out what's the right language to use for your rocks or your tasks or your quarters or your 12-week
Yeah,
years or whatever, like some of it is
sure.
so similar, but it reminds you, it shows you a different way to think about it, a different thing to call it. Like it reminds you about these things that we already know. We just put
Yeah.
them into the right framework that makes sense for us.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, for me, the steps to break free. Sort of step one is to recognize where the chains exist. Step two is to figure out what is a more empowering path through that. Step 2A or part three is to create accountability or structure that helps support it. And I have a step four off that, which is really that an idea that I've been playing with in terms of coaching or helping people on progress is looking at the people that we surround ourselves with. And my illustration for this is to sort of suggest that if you looked at it, for anybody that's already on a path and that they felt that they've grown, right? People, if you're in a place that you're like, I'm exactly where I was 5 years ago, it's not going to work for you. But if you've grown over the last 10 years, one of the things I've noticed is that the people you surround yourself with now, excuse me, so the other way around. The people that you surrounded yourself back then, you wouldn't tolerate now. You wouldn't tolerate now. It just wouldn't be the group that supports you, that invigorates you, that lights your fire or anything like that.
Well, and to be clear, it might be the same people. You just all of you may have evolved
Yes,
over
that's
the
true.
time frame.
Yeah, that they are different. That it has to be them from back then,
Right.
and you may not tolerate them. You may tolerate them now, who they are now, because they've grown with you. But who they were back then, you wouldn't have tolerated or kept with you. So it kind of needs to be true that for you to grow 5 or 10 years from now, you won't be with these people. You won't tolerate the team that's around you, who you surround yourself with. So what I have found is being a helpful step is to be in an environment of people that inspire you to be somewhere where you want to be. So you kind of always have to be. Now, look, I don't think that's a lock, stock. Oh, like we're gonna throw out five people and bring new five people in. I just feel like it's like a continuum. We're kind of replacing the bottom one with a new top one, or the bottom two with the next top two, or whatever that looks like. And so it happens gradually. But we should have people around us that for to whom we aspire to be like we want to go towards that. That's a better picture, as opposed to surrounding ourselves with people that reinforce where we're currently stuck. And look, the illustration for me is first that Mac group, because that was the people I wanted to be around. That was 10 plus years ago. Many of them wouldn't survive my beer list today of people who I'd hang out with, but they were great back then. And as I look at the people that I have within my coaching program, like my peers there, those are the people that I'm going for. And I would tell you that even today, there are business owners I feel like, and this is sort of just a little bit about my path. I feel like I may have topped out within the attorney world, at least the one that I work with, and some of the people that I aspire to are outside of the attorney world. Now, I'm not talking about like luminaries that I'm ever going to meet, but like literal friends of mine are outside of the industry because what I'm striving for and what I'm looking for is they're exemplifying that more than anybody that I can find inside the law industry. And so it's just I noticed it within myself is that that's what's happened. And so I suggested for other people as being helpful in that path is to kind of notice like who's pulling you? Like what's the what's the solar system that you're in? Where are you orbiting off of it? And is it where you want to be? Because you're going to get attracted towards the people that you're most around.
Are you looking at that from like, I want to be more like so and so, or are you looking at that from like the Shazam, like the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, like like
Yeah. In terms of like they have all of it. Look, I think that it's a good question and not one I've considered. So I'm going to give you the answer that processes for me, which is that I don't know that there are fully formed humans from whom I want all parts.
okay,
But at the same time, I don't know that I have brought somebody on simply because they have a singular piece that I'm looking for. It's usually a composition of things. So let's say that there are, it's making stuff up that doesn't exist. Let's say maybe there'd be 12 factors off of it. Most of the
right,
people, eight or nine of
okay,
them, and I'm
got it.
ditching 10 to 12 kind of thing. But nobody's there just because they've got one or two. And nobody's inside of like, I really like being around Jordan because he's got a sense of style, but I don't like anything else that he's doing. I don't like his business stuff. I don't like
Such
his marketing.
honesty.
Like if I'm going to be around Jordan, it's because Jordan's
Yeah,
got 9 to 12 of those things, right? Off of it. And he inspires me and I want to be around those elements of those 9 or 12 that I really, really like.
I like the threading the needle between the two options that I gave you. Is there a fifth step, or is that the
Now, I think those four for right now is
okay?
things that I would kind of look. And by the way, that is a long road for a lot of people that haven't already started.
Sure.
I respect that this ask is this is a heavy lift, right? This is not lightweight for people. And so, we're thinking through like doing these steps. If you go down this path, 100% props for you, even beginning, because to examine these things that have defined you and then be willing to do the examination because you want to challenge them like victory lap for you. We'll throw a parade and you don't have to get it done at once and you don't have to get it done in a short period of time. I'm asking for progress, not perfection. I just want you to take a little step forward. I would like you to stay committed. Let me help you find how to get for where you need to be and get supported along the way because I don't think these things are easy to do. And I don't think that people will go through this in a straight line. I think people will have fits and starts. They will go off into a wrong direction and start in another direction, and that's normal. And you gotta know that. You gotta know that going in that that's what you're going to be up for. So look, enough on those four, and it's a lot. And props to you if you start.
Well, but also like to me, this is one of those hedonic treadmill things. If you get on this path, by the time you think you're at the end of the path, you're going to go back and realize now you are the person who would be disappointed by the goals that you set to start you down this path. So that's why I think you really have to be enjoying the journey because, I don't want to call it a moving target because I don't like that. You are moving and then realizing you have addressed this target. Now you're looking for that target. So it's a moving series of targets as
Sure.
you win, as you succeed, as you achieve. No, not achieve, as you.
And there's nothing that suggests that you have to continue on a particular path. That's the whole idea of renegotiating those commitments or obligations that go in there. There's nothing to say that if you change your mind, what you did before is less valuable because of the fact that you changed your mind. So that's in terms of you moving. If you move in a point that says that before, I'd never have done that again, no one's asking you to. Stay as present as you need to through this because right. So Arthur Brooks, who wrote a book on happiness, co-authored it with Oprah Winfrey. But one of the things that he talks about is being the definition of what happiness is happiness is defined on the journey, not the destination. And so where you are in that path is how you define whether you're happy. You're not going to arrive to happy. You're not going to arrive to a laid back life. You're not going to arrive to those things. You're going to be in situ with that. And that's really about how you show up day to day. Now, you have to work on the circumstances that make that possible. Challenging yourself, being surrounded by family or people that care about you, being transcendent in your approach, understanding that there's a world bigger than you, right? Off of this and kind of understanding that you are a small part of things that you don't control is there as well. But you go through this path, you go through this and kind of create these circumstances where you can be, got to have some money to make that happen. I don't think anybody's happy, being poor all the time, or finding financial insecurity. Got to figure out solutions to that. But it's in the process, it's in the journey that we're actually experiencing that happiness, not at the destination point. It's not some place of arrival.
See, I go even farther. If you are not happy during the journey, you're never going to get to the destination.
Oh, that's fair. I like that. I like that. You might as well erase happiness if you're not currently happy while you're in the journey. Just let it go. You're not going to get there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because like there's 1,000 things that happen to you when you are at peace with the current moment, as well as striving for the next moment. If you don't have that current balance, you're gonna burn out. You're gonna psychologically, subconsciously torment yourself. You're gonna tank your path.
Fair.
Cool.
Absolutely fair.
All right, so next week will be the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So we're gonna do a special episode. I'm not gonna burden a guest with being with us next week. Instead, I'm gonna talk to you about being thankful and gift giving. So we're gonna take a lot of the stuff we learned about here and how do you say thanks to the people that have helped you create a great life? How do you give gifts to show that appreciation for people? I'll also tell you not to give gifts for the holiday season anyway, but we're gonna air it in the holiday season because you won't listen to me. That being said, Victor, for anybody who's been here with us and wants like, I don't know, one more tip from the well, what's the biggest tip that you have to help more people own a business they can be proud of and live a life that's even better?
Um, I would leave people with this idea, which is to have grace with the progress that you're making, because this is not an easy journey. People don't spend enough time celebrating small wins that they have. They are running in the kind of old Dan Sullivan way towards the horizon and gapping out along the way rather than looking at the progress that they're making. And so when you're on this path and this journey, I recognize it's a lonely one. I've lived it as a lonely one. I define it as one that, you don't have a lot of peers that are in there. Find somebody you can celebrate wins with yourself, have grace with where you currently are, and then stay committed to making progress. Those are the things that I think are core elements, ingredients in the people that I have observed be wildly successful and wildly happy along the way.
See, it's fascinating because like you got the expression right, misery loves company. But I have felt so much more connected to other people the happier and more successful I've been.
Mm.
When as opposed to when I was miserable, I kind of felt like everybody was at the bar at 1:59 figuring out who they'd go home with instead of like actually wanting to be hanging out with me or playing golf with me or whatever. Like it's
Yeah.
become less lonely, I think, at least for me.
Good. I'm glad.
All right. So for anybody who wants more of your wonderful wisdom, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
The thing that I do that I love more than anything else is I've got a podcast of information called Retirees. It's RETIREASE at the end. And really, what I do off of that is I help people live a life of deliberation and retirement. It's like the metric for retirement isn't just the money that you've got; it's all of these other elements, like where you are with your faith and your family and your health and your happiness and all of these things. And it's all tips in that area. Took everything I do in coaching for attorneys, and I turned into coaching for my clients as well. So if you want more information on this, especially for that last third of life, go check that out because it's the thing that I'm happiest with. It makes me $0, but I absolutely love doing it. So that's where I want to point you.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who watched and listened to this episode. We'll see you back here next week for Just May. But it'll be a shorter episode. So, pros and cons.